Hey, what's going on, guys? This is AndrewChicken and welcome back to another video. In this one, we're going to be making a new and updated tier list for the Paladins Street Style World Tour update. There have been a lot of balance changes since the last tier list, and so it's time to make another one. Now, before we actually get into the tier list, I do of course want to give a few disclaimers as always. First of all, this is just my opinion. This is an opinion-based tier list on the internet, so don't take it too seriously. There are always a few people who make absolute fools out of themselves in the comments section by getting way too heated about a tier list that is just my opinion. So please, keep it civil and respectful in the comment section, but you are absolutely entitled to have your own opinion, and in fact, I encourage you to go into the comment section down below and type where you disagree with me on this tier list, where you agree with me on this tier list. Generally just give your thoughts and comparisons, because I always like to check the comments and see where I might have been wrong about an opinion that I put on this list. Next, let's talk about the format of the tier list. So there are 5 different tiers, and these tiers have been standard throughout my tier lists for a long time now. We have the D tier, which is the tier for characters that you generally should not be playing in ranked. These characters are redundant in the meta, and while they may be fun, they are just not viable picks at the moment if you're trying to win. Next, we have the C tier, and this is the most important tier, so pay attention, because this is where I inject nuance into my tier list. The C tier is for characters that would otherwise be A or S tier, however, they are extremely niche. You cannot inject them into just any team comp. Usually you have to make sure that either their counters aren't on the enemy team, or you have a specific team comp built around these champions. So yeah, they are extremely strong. They're just not generalist characters, and so you're very limited in terms of when you can play them. Next up, we have the B tier, and B is of course for balanced. This tier is for the characters that are generally alright. If you're good at them, you can definitely pop off, but they're certainly not the cream of the crop. Generally just the average tier. After that, we have the A tier, and this is for characters that are very strong right now, very good, solid, viable picks, and you generally want to be prioritizing these champions. Then finally, we have the S tier, and this is for ban pick priority characters. These are extremely strong characters right now, and yeah, nothing really more to be said about that tier. Now, it's also important to understand the hierarchy within each tier because there is some ordering going on there. So I have each character placed based on their class up first. So we have the front lines, then the flanks, then the damage champions, then the supports. And having a front line being ahead of a support does not necessarily mean that that front line is better than that support. So if I have a Zon ahead of Pip, that does not mean that a Zon is better than Pip. However, within each class, the rank and the order does matter. So if I have a Zon ahead of Inara, then that does mean a Zon is better than Inara. Very important to remember that distinction. Finally, let's talk about the criteria which I am using to determine the placement of every character on this list, because I have a few different things that I look at. So first of all, this tier list is generally for competitive ranked gameplay at about a Diamond to Grandmaster level. And I'm also looking at win rate, pick rate, and ban rate data when making the decisions for how I rank these characters. However, that does not have the final say on where I put these characters, because you also have to interpret the data, and that's where my experience as a multiple-time Grandmaster comes in. I've hit Grandmaster a few different times this season, and I also hit Grandmaster last season in Season 6. So I have plenty of experience in this game, and I use that experience to gauge where I put the champions on this list. Now, before we get started, I really appreciate it if you would check down below and make sure that you're subscribed, because more than half the people who watch my channel are not subscribed, and it really helps out, especially since, well, as Paladins continues to age and get older, it is slowly losing more and more players, and that means that supporting content creators for this game is more important now than ever to make sure that the game continues to live on into the future, and also so that we can continue making content for you. So I'd really appreciate your support, and with that being said, let's get started with the D tier. So the D tier this time around is quite small. There are a lot of characters missing between last tier list and this tier list, and that's honestly because Evil Mojo, to their credit, has been doing a much better job of bringing all the characters closer together in terms of their strength. There are much fewer outliers this time around, in my opinion, and I think that's a very good thing. So in the D tier, we only have 3 characters: Ceres, Genos, and Betty La Bamba. And these 3 remain in D tier from the last tier list. Ceres did get some small buffs recently, but not anything meaningful to bring her back up to the higher tiers, and if you want a full video about why Ceres is such a problematic character when it comes to her high level, high rank viability, then I do have a video for that linked in the description. Genos didn't get any changes, and so there's absolutely no reason to move him. He's still not a competent solo support, and while he can do some cool things with double support, I guess, he's still just not super favorable, and you'd rather have most other supports in the game on your team. And then finally, Betty La Bamba. She also got a small buff this patch, but nothing to really boost her viability. She's still a character who is extremely weak to flying characters, flank characters, high mobility characters. She's extremely map specific, and even on the maps where she's good, there are many other characters that are better, so Betty remains in the D tier. And we are moving on already to the C tiers, so please remember, the C tier is for characters that would otherwise be A or S tier, however they are extremely niche and you cannot play them all the time. You have to build a specific comp around them, or make sure that the enemies do not have specific counter champions. So up first, let's talk about the supports, and I have moved Moji down into the C tier. That is the big difference between this tier list and last tier list. So Moji is a phenomenal character, an S tier character quite frankly, but she also belongs in the same niche pretty much as Grok, where you need a comp that has a lot of tanks and sort of a death ball playstyle. And she's also rather map specific due to her range. She is absolutely phenomenal, spits out crazy healing, crazy survivability, and she even has pretty good damage to boot, but it comes at the cost of needing a good team to be built around her and needing to be on the right map. And, well, what I just said about Moji is pretty much identical for Grok, except I'd say he's a little bit more flexible, and I still think he's the king of pirate comps personally, but both of them are absolutely phenomenal for their role. Corvus is a pocket champion. You want to pick him when the enemies don't have that much dive, because he is very susceptible to being dove, but also you want to pick him when you do have some good carry flank champions on your team, like a good Androxus or a good Vatu, Vora, someone like that. So he definitely does shine, but only in specific circumstances. And then Rey is the double support queen. She is fantastic at powering up her second support, whether it be a good Grok or a good Furia, good Ying, anyone like that who can pump out damage, pump out heals, pump out utility all at the same time. And she's also really good on Bazaar. That's the one map where she can kind of solo support, I guess, at least when we're talking a highly competitive experience. She does have her weaknesses. She has certain counterplay. For example, Koga is the hardest counter to Rey in the entire flank class, because he can both cleanse her link with his dash and completely ignore envelop. If you have champions like that on the enemy team, she's not that good. And also she is map dependent, because certain maps like Timbermill are absolutely awful for her due to her range restrictions. So a very good champion, but not someone who can be picked all the time. Next we have the damage champions, and I have moved Drogoz down from A tier to C tier, and I have done that to basically make him consistent with all the other champions who already belong in C tier, because Drogoz is a phenomenal character. However, he does have a lot of counterplay in the form of hit scans. Drogoz of course gets completely and utterly shut down by characters like Androxus and Octavia, and especially when they're strong like they are right now, Drogoz just cannot be played when they are in the lobby. But when they're not in the lobby, then all of a sudden it turns around and Drogoz is the most overpowered character in the game. So he's really, he's got an interesting dynamic there, and it means that he's very off and on, and he can only be played in certain situations, but in those situations, there is almost no one better. So yeah, Drogo's very interesting character in that regard. And then Dredge is basically the better Betty. He is the Ice Mine's king. He's really good at spamming choke points, and he does have a little bit more utility than Betty in the form of his slow, or if you want to play Hurl and have better anti-air damage, he has that. He just has a few better tools than Betty, and so they both share the same niche, but Dredge does that better, which is why he ends up in C tier and she ends up in D tier. Next we have the lone flank in the C category, which is Buck, and Buck is all in or nothing on the dive. If he is allowed to dive against a comp that is susceptible to it, he looks like the most broken, overpowered character in the game. But as soon as you get some anti-dive on the enemy team, or your comp is not a good dive comp, then Buck just completely falls apart. So let's say you've got Kinessa in your backline, and then you've got Atlas on the enemy team, and Rey as well. Buck is just, oh man, it's brutal out here for Buck. So he's a very all-or-nothing character, and that is the perfect definition of a C-tier character. Finally, we have Yaggaroth, Rom, and Torvald, which are the same three tanks that were in C-tier the last time, and all three of these are fantastic characters. Utterly amazing. but you just have to be a little bit more careful with how you pick them. Yagharoth is just weird. There are some maps where she excels on because she's able to wall abuse with her ultimate, basically getting a free kill by ulting behind a wall where the enemies can't hit her, but she can still get the execute off. However, that is very map specific, and certain characters that are really good against tanks will indeed shut her down, so she's a little goofy. Rom is sort of in a similar boat. He is really good in triple tank comps or quad tank comps because of subservience, scaling his healing based on the maximum health pools of the other characters on his team, so that is absolutely fantastic, but obviously it's situational, and if you're in a more conventional 2-tank comp, then you do have to worry more about crowd control from the enemies, and percent-based damage, and generally just big bursts of damage, like chain reaction or something like that, so he is also a very niche character in that regard. And Torvald is a fantastic character as well. He's really good when you're able to pocket someone, very similar to Corvus, but he will get shut down if you have enemies that really are good at buying Wrecker and you also happen to have a second shield tank on your team. For example, if you have Torvald and Fernando, the enemies are highly incentivized to buy Wrecker, and then Torvald will just get his shield smoked and evaporated in just a couple seconds. So you do have to be very careful in that regard, and also his ultimate is better on some maps than others, so he's a little situational there too, but don't get it twisted, Torvald is absolutely fantastic. Now we're going to move on to the B tier, and this tier has seen a couple new additions. Not in the support category though, we still have Lilith and Grover, but I have moved Grover ahead of Lilith, and Grover's in an interesting case because on the last tier list, I actually think I was wrong with where I placed Grover. I put him in B tier there. I think I should have put him in D tier because they absolutely killed him after removing his keywords. However, they have brought him back, they've reworked him, they've given him a new talent in place of Rampant Blooming, and that has drastically changed how the character is played, and overall I think he's doing alright. He is very good in double support comps right now, particularly because he is able to do a lot of healing and do a lot of damage and have a lot of utility all at the same time. However, as a solo support, he's alright. He's not terrible, but he's not great either because his healing output is still among the lower end compared to other supports. He has that big area burst heal, and he does have the passive healing as well, but it's just not the same as what some other characters can churn out, unfortunately. But he does still have pretty decent damage output as well. He's overall just a pretty fine character, and maybe you can make an argument for low A, but I think high B is a good enough place for him right now. Maybe that's a little conservative of me, I don't know. But then we have Lilith, and she also got some changes this update, a few buffs, and also a talent rework, but I don't think that has ultimately done that much for Lilith in terms of her general consistency within the meta. I still think she's alright, a little weird to play around, and I'm just going to leave her in B tier for now. Next up, we have the damage champions, and oh boy, B tier is just the tier for the damage champions. There are so many here, and most of these you've seen before. As a matter of fact, the first 5 haven't changed at all, both because they haven't gotten any actual balance changes. No, Vivian and Victor's changes weren't real changes, and yeah, also just because nothing's really happened around them to make them shift up or down. But then we have both snipers right next to each other, having a cute little date in B tier. And yeah, Kinessa went down from A to B in my opinion because between the last tier list and now, she has gotten a couple of nerfs, she has gotten a talent rework, and ultimately, yeah, it's just left her slightly weaker than she once was. Her fire rate isn't as high, meaning she doesn't hit follow-up shots as quickly now, and also the Mind Talent wasn't the meta way to play her anyways, but the Mind Talent that they replaced the old Mind Talent with, they replaced Octopressor with Crystalline Battery. Crystalline Battery is just god-awful. It's a terrible talent, and yeah, that certainly hasn't done her any favors. So yeah, we're just going to leave her in B tier right next to Strix. Strix has been buffed up, and ultimately I do think he's in a pretty solid spot right now, and so yeah, I just decided, hey, why not put him right next to Kinessa? Evil Mojo have honestly, I think, done a pretty good job with revitalizing the snipers, making them feel fresh, strong, but not overwhelming, and so I'm just going to put them right next to each other, and you could put Strix ahead of Kinessa or Kinessa ahead of Strix. I just pretty much view them as even right now, and that's where I'm going to leave them. And finally, we have Omen and Leon. Now, Omen was here previously at the top of B tier, and that really hasn't changed. He is still a very strong damage champion who's able to churn out a metric crap ton of damage, but he does have his shortcomings. He can be a little buggy sometimes, his ultimate can be very useless sometimes, and also he does tend to struggle at range with that shotgun, having to wind it up before you finally get into a medium ranged mode, so that is definitely a problem for Omen, but overall he's still pretty pretty good character. Now, I have moved Leon down from A tier into B tier even though she hasn't gotten any changes. Why the heck have I done that? Well, I've done that because A, a few other damage champions have been shifted around, and B, tanks have gotten stronger. And when tanks are strong, Leon generally isn't as good, because her tank pressure isn't nearly as great as many other damage champions in the game. She still has exceptional burst damage that allows her to be an expert duelist versus most of the flanks and damage champions in this game. However, her tank pressure can be lacking, and against certain off-tanks, she will just crumble. And that's not a very good thing for Leon. Now, certainly she's in a better state than she would be if she didn't get buffed at all this year. The buffs they gave her at the start of the year have helped keep her viable, and she's still a very good damage champion. However, I think it's time for her to drop down into this tier, still at the top of B tier, still a very respectable ranking, but yeah, tanks will absolutely pummel her face. Now we have the flank champions, and we have two new additions in the B tier from the D tier. That's what we like to see. So, Kasumi and Seven, let's talk about them because those are the champions that I have moved. Kasumi has gotten another round of buffs in the recent update, and she is extremely obnoxious to play against. I will just tell you that right now for a fact, she is annoying. And she is, I would consider now, a viable flank. Is she the top of the meta? No. Is she still a must pick? No, not necessarily. But if you're good at Kasumi, she can be scary. Like, really scary. And she does have some very strong suits about her. She has very consistent damage, very high bursts if you set her up properly. And of course, she has that very powerful ultimate, which will be a bunch of potentially AoE DOT that will also disarm enemies. That's pretty scary too, and it can have a really good uptime with the right setup. So, she does have some things going for her. This last round of buffs has left her in a pretty solid state, and she is overall, yeah, I no longer see it fit to keep her in D tier, so up into B tier she goes. Now, Seven has also moved up from the D tier to the B tier. Why is that? Well, he also got a bunch of changes in this update, including a lot of power shifts, but power shifts that I think have left him in a little bit of a stronger state. So first of all, his weapon got changed. Burst mode got a damage buff at the cost of a range nerf, and that means that he does more damage in his effective range now, and he still has pretty good range when all is said and done, so I consider that to be a net positive. His Terror card, which gave him incredibly strong mobility, has been put into base kit at a medium level, allowing him to have consistent mobility now, and his grapple effectively works the same as Vor's Tendril now for the purposes of how far away you can activate it and then how far it sends you. It still has some differences in functionality, but for the most part, it is now consistent, and that is great. But also what that has done is by reworking Terror, they have freed up potentially 5 loadout points in your loadout that you can now invest into the health card, or Red Room, or any other type of card that will make Seven stronger. So that is also a buff. And then finally, they have made it so that his dodge roll now has a 1/4 of a second of total damage immunity, kind of like a Souls-like dodge, and this gives him an extra layer of survivability, and also, with enough skill, a way to counter some pretty serious stuff like the damage from a Bomb King ult or something like that. So that is definitely very strong as well, and I have literally won duels this patch with Seven because I dodge rolled and successfully blocked an attack, so that definitely has meaningful value. And they also reworked Overcharge and gave it Decree 77, which is a new talent that allows him to execute people with his ultimate if he does enough damage to them. It's a little goofy, I'm not sure where that falls into the meta, but it does give him an option to have an ultimate that does a lot of damage instead of relying on crowd control to deal with the enemies, which can be good if his team already has a lot of crowd control to begin with and he anticipates the enemies to buy Unbound. So it gives him another option, which I guess is pretty cool. So overall, yeah, that does leave him in a stronger spot, and I'm going to give him a firm B tier rankings right smack dab in the middle of all these flanks. Now, there's not really much to talk about in terms of the rest of these flanks here. I have not moved Maeve, Lex, Xin, nor Caspian, and 3 of those champions have not gotten changes, and so that's why they haven't moved. But Caspian did get some changes. Here's why I have not moved him at all. So Everywhere at Once got buffed. It actually technically got more of a rework than a buff, but it ended up being a buff. And that is all well and good. It's Got Some Heft also got a buff. It actually ended up getting reverted to the base, stronger version that he released with. Both of those are great for the champion. He has a little bit more talent diversity now. However, his best talent is still Measured Cadence, because it offers him powerful, consistent damage and more uptime on his cripple. And they have not changed that talent. They haven't made it stronger, they haven't made it weaker. And so because his most optimal meta playstyle has not changed, and none of the other playstyles have surpassed it, there's no reason for me to move Caspian out of B tier. So he stays put exactly where he is. Finally, we have just two tanks, Barrack and Ashe, and both of these are perfectly competent, viable tanks. However, they just fall short for one reason or another compared to most of their counterparts in the tank class. In Barrack's case, he's just a little squishier, he's missing some quality of life that kind of holds him back from other tanks. For example, he can't activate his shield mid-air, his rocket boot reset card failsafe isn't as good as Makoa's Ebb and Flow, which recently got reworked, a bunch of small things like that, and he does have relatively poor matchups versus some of the main tanks like Inara. Ashe is also a perfectly competent off-tank, and she can be very strong in the right situation, don't get it twisted. However, other off-tanks generally provide more value or do more damage or something like that. So, while you can definitely play both of these characters extremely well, and you're definitely not throwing or anything like that if you pick these champions, there are usually better options out there, but yeah, it's more of a situation of being less good rather than being bad when it comes to these tanks, who I would consider to be the bottom two right now in regards to the tank class. And now we come to the A tier, and, well, this is the tier of the tanks, if the B tier was the tier for the damage champions anyways. There are so many tanks in A tier, and I want to explain to you what happened with that, but we will get to that in a second. First, we have to discuss the other classes, and up first we have the support class. So, Pip, Furia, and Ying have not been changed at all, and as such they remain in the exact same position in the A tier. However, Io has been changed. In a hotfix recently, they made it so that Sacrifice is true healing, so her second life now gives her the same amount of healing regardless of how high the cauterized level is. And this, in my opinion, allows her to go firmly above Furia in the A tier now. But previously, I believe she was at the bottom, and now she is under Ying. And yeah, that's because having a second life as a support in the form of Sacrifice is a very big deal. It makes her a pretty hard anti-dive character, because if you're playing as a flank against her, you either have to find Luna and then kill Luna, which wastes precious seconds and a whole lot of resources trying to kill because it's very tanky, and then you have to go and kill Io, or you kill Io, and then you have to wait for her to resurrect, respawn with Sacrifice, and then you have to kill her again. And both of those are not particularly savory options, and the first option is even worse when you consider the fact that Io can just notice that Luna's taking damage and then move Luna to a safe position, making it even harder to kill Luna. So that alone makes her really, really good, but she also has very powerful healing in her own right, pretty solid damage. She's just kind of like an anti-dive support, like the definitive one. She is just crazy at that right now, and so that is why I have moved her ever so slightly up in A tier. She retains the consistency, the healing, all of that previously put her in A tier, but now this Sacrifice buff has made it so that she is stronger. Alrighty, next up are the damage champions, and you'll notice that some things have definitely shifted around here. So we still have Sati and Tyra in the A tier, and both of these champions are still very good. Sati has fantastic crowd control with Window of Opportunity, some pretty good area denial with her coin and her ultimate, very consistent damage that is good against both squishy champions and tanks alike. She's a very solid performer. And then Tyra, of course, is the tank buster. She has the fire, she has the consistent damage, she has the tankiness of her own to actually stand toe-to-toe against a tank. She is very, very good in that aspect, and so she obviously remains in A tier. However, we have Octavia, Cassie, and Willow in the A tier now, and this is where things get interesting. Octavia was previously in the B tier, and Cassie and Willow were previously in the S tier, so what happened here? Well, as you can probably guess, Octavia got buffed while the other two got nerfed. Octavia got sort of a soft rework this update. She had one of her talents partially put into base kit, which allows her to heal herself and others with Commanding Leap, and in place of that she got a new talent which gives her 10% bonus damage on her marksman rifle while she is in the air using her commanding leap, which does give her a pretty sizable damage bonus. But of course, there is the risk-reward factor of, well, you get this bonus damage, but the enemies do have a very easy time shooting at you because you're stationary and not behind cover. So while it is very strong, I don't think it's like S tier busted or anything. On top of that, her distortion field now provides her and all allies inside of it a 300% jump boost, which allows them to reach certain high grounds and generally play around with her mobility. It's nice, but again, not like the biggest S tier buff or anything like that. And then finally, they have changed how her gun handles, and this is very important because, first of all, her unscoped shots are now viable. They were previously basically impossible to use because the accuracy was just abhorrent. It was so bad, you were basically gambling whether or not you hit the enemies. But now, it is consistent. You can consistently hit your target. There is still some spread. You'll still miss occasionally, but you can rely on it now, and that means that she has a much better tool up close and personal when fighting enemies. Again, still not S tier material, because at the end of the day, the DPS of the unscoped shots isn't anything to write home about. It's consistent on par with, I guess, I don't know, someone like Vivian or maybe Strix's pistol, but with very poor ammo consumption, so you will have to reload quite a lot while doing that. And then the scoped in shots have not received a damage bonus whatsoever. They've just been made a little bit easier to hit. And so she technically on paper isn't doing really that much more damage than she was last patch, apart from if you are using commanding leap with the new talent. But yeah, in practice, her usability has just skyrocketed because she is so much more fluid and so much easier to play. And that has seen a boost in her play rate and has seen a boost in her power, and that's why I've moved her back up to A tier. Because the reason I moved her to B tier in the first place was that she was generally a wholly unpopular character, and while she was pretty solid in terms of her damage output, there was just no real reason to play her because she was so clunky and other characters just did her job better. But now, she is a decently smooth option and she does do a lot of damage. She packs a huge punch. And so, back up into A tier she goes. But then yeah, Cassie and Willow are still fantastic champions, but both have received pretty hard-hitting nerfs, and they are now no longer a full step above their peers in the damage class. Cassie got the damage over time on her blast shot removed, which is a very big deal. It means that she loses a lot of ultimate generation, a lot of consistent trickle damage, a lot of pseudo reveals through walls, and she now no longer hits a lot of kill thresholds that she previously would have achieved. But she is still a very powerful character. She has great builds, she has great damage, consistent damage across all ranges, very big bursts, consistent tank pressure, and she still retains many of the other buffs that she's received over the past year and a half or so. She still instantly reloads her ammo when ulting and fires way faster. She still has the slow attached to the disengage, which is some really good crowd control. So, she is a very strong character and still deserving of an A ranking, but is no longer the S tier material that she once was. And then Willow got a massive nerf to Blast Flower. 1 stack less on Blast Flower. Doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but in practice it means she's losing hundreds of extra damage, sometimes over the course of a sustained fight, thousands of extra damage when she's battling tanks. She has lost a lot of tank pressure as a result of this Blast Flower change. She can still kill squishies in about the same number of shots. There are some situations where she's going to need 1 shot extra, maybe 2 if she misses a little bit, but that hasn't really changed. What has changed is, yeah, that pressure versus tanks. And that is a very big deal because, like I said earlier with Leon, tanks are really good right now. So you have to have good options when dealing with them, and this just got a whole lot worse. So, yeah, she's still a fantastic champion with a lot of mobility, a lot of damage, and that very powerful dead zone, but she's just not as good as she once was, and so she also drops a tier. Next up, we have the flanks, and we still have Androxus and Eevee at the top of A tier. Nothing's changed with them. Both of them are still fantastic options, especially if you're really good at them. That's when they really shine. And yeah, they're super strong, but not totally overwhelming in terms of the meta right now. They're just very good A tier picks. Can't really argue with that. But Talus and Skye have both moved from S tier down to A tier. So what happened here? Well, Talus got sort of a double whammy this update in terms of his viability on Controller, and Controller is the whole reason why he was in the meta in the first place. So he got an accuracy penalty on his gun just in general, which especially impacts him while he's using Overcharge. And then also Controller Aim Assist has been nerfed across the board, and they double dipped on Talus. So it's generally a lot less consistent to hit shots on him than it was before. And that does mean that he is a little bit less savory when it comes to controller meta, but he is still phenomenal. So he's still an A tier ranking, clearly, just I don't really think he is an S tier sort of flank right now. And then Skye also dropped down to A. She didn't get any changes apart from, again, also the aforementioned controller changes. But, yeah, she's really moved down because I just didn't really see it fit to put her in S tier when you consider the champion that I did move up to S tier, being in the meta right now. She's still fantastic, especially when you pair her with Smoke and Daggers and a really good off-tank like Makoa. That combo, that synergy, mwah, it is so strong. Dissipate the card, plus Smoke and Dagger, 40% movement speed boost on Makoa, or Fernando, or Azan, anyone like that is absurd. So that's still very, very good, but yeah, still, it's just not like the S tier thing that it once was. And now, let's talk about my favorite class, the tanks. Can you tell I have a tank bias? Yes, I do, but also, tanks genuinely are, from an objective standpoint, insane in this game. They are all fantastic. There is not a single bad tank in Paladins, and the same can't be said for pretty much any other class. There's a damage champion in D tier, there are 2 supports in D tier, most of the damage class is in B tier, but tanks are solid freaking options right now. Now, there is still a disparity between the top of A tier and the bottom of A tier. There is a very clear power difference there, but every single tank in the A tier is strong enough and has enough counterplay against most of the other tanks in A tier that I don't really feel like any of these tanks are a whole class above the others that deserve S tier, which is why I've moved every single tank that was previously in S tier down into A tier. Because what they've done is A, they have nerfed one of the S tier tanks, and that was Nyx, but B, they've also buffed 2 off-tanks that were already really strong to begin with, and so that's why you notice that Azan and Ruckus are at the very top of A tier, Nyx has moved down, and then you also still have Terminus and Khan at the top of A tier that are also fantastic options. So I guess let's go through one by one and talk about why each of these are fantastic. Starting with Inara, bottom of A tier. That technically makes her the 3rd worst tank right now, according to my tier list. But yeah, she's still really good. She has a lot of tools at her disposal to be really strong. First of all, she's just super tanky, and that alone is nice, you know? She's very easy to heal, she can hold an objective very, very well, and that has its merits, of course. She's also very good at trapping people. Her wall can be used to basically warden off certain players and let her team just roll through them and destroy them. And that can also pair with Treacherous Ground to really hammer it home with a giant cripple field that is currently, like, the biggest reason why Bulldozer is bought. Might be the only reason why Bulldozer is purchased at all in this game. Like, it is genuinely that good. Or you could go the Mother's Grace option and have CC immunity, which also has its own merits. She's still definitely not the strongest tank in the game, that's why there are so many ahead of her, but she is an absolutely viable, strong option, and there's nothing wrong with picking her if you enjoy playing her, and you definitely know what you're doing. So that's absolutely fantastic. Nyx has gone down a lot. She's still good. Very good. But the recent nerf has hit her pretty hard. Her Poison Aura no longer applies a damage over time effect that lingers when you leave the area. So the enemies must be within the area of the aura in order to take that damage. And this has drastically hurt her damage output. This impacts her in several ways. She has lost the ability to basically continuously put pressure on the enemies even long after they have left her radius. That also, you know, previously would have stopped them from healing out of combat, or would have even potentially killed them if they didn't get attention from their healer fast enough. So that is gone. Also, that means that she loses damage credits, because if you're doing less damage, then you don't build up those damage credits as much, and so it's a little bit harder for Nyx to buy items now. Also, it has drastically reduced the amount of ultimate charge that she gets, because the passive damage, while it wasn't super noticeable for getting kills, was absolutely fantastic at skyrocketing her ultimate charge generation. So that's gone as well. And also, if you want to still capitalize on the damage of the aura, you are now absolutely dependent on a build that uses the aura range card and the aura damage card. And if you don't have any of that, then you might as well not have damage on the radius at all. So it restricts her build diversity. If you want to get value out of the aura, you must go for a specific build, and if you go for any other build, you all but completely sacrifice the damage of your royal presence, whereas previously you would have still gotten a lot of value out of it. So this has absolutely hurt Nyx, but she still has a lot going for her. She's still exceptionally tanky. She has a shield which can cleanse, cauterize, and block a lot of damage, and she also has royal presence which can spread out damage over time, make it easier for her healer to heal her, and then that stacks with the passive that she gets, where when she's on the objective, she receives more healing. So that's all fantastic. The ultimate can still cleanse all of the purple health that you get from Royal Presence. She still does a lot of damage from her own abilities. She still has a crazy amount of crowd control. Fantastic tank, but an absolute sucker punch to the gut when it comes to the damage of Royal Presence, and that does take her down quite a bit. After that, we have Makoa. Makoa has been doing really well recently, like really, really well. Extremely popular, extremely fun. Everybody loves Makoa. He is a skillful tank. He does pretty good damage, pretty good burst combos. His shield is fantastic, of course. A lot of his cards got buffed in a recent update, which allows him to have crazy good uptime on damage reduction after hooking, or have good mobility on his shell spin, or have increased healing while he's low, or have just so many different things. Ebb and Flow is also a fantastic level 1 filler that basically gives him 2 charges of shell spin, so he has so many good cards in his builds. All of his talents are in a really good state, and of course, we can't forget about the hook. One of the most powerful abilities in the game when used right. A well-placed hook can literally be a free kill on the enemy if your own team is paying attention and damages them properly. So yeah, do not ever underestimate the value of the hook. And his ultimate is also pretty good. They got rid of most of the jank when they initially made his ult increase him in size. And of course, the ultimate also does more damage now, has more health, makes him basically immune to hit scan bonus damage, because when you headshot him, he actually takes less damage. That's a really good space-making ult. Overall, he's just absolutely fantastic right now. And then, of course, Atlas. The most difficult tank in the game, arguably, because you have to have a lot of skill. You have to be thinking in 4D, thinking about where the enemies are going to go when you rewind them, thinking about where you're going to go when you rewind yourself. But if you play him well, he gets insane levels of value, because Second Chance is, well, basically a second life. His wall can absolutely cut the map in half with the right talent, or you can have a really good uptime on it with a different build, and his crowd control forces the enemies to buy Unbound pretty much every single time, which it makes it very good in the early game, because you just have all this crazy crowd control before they've ramped up Unbound, and then late game, you've still forced an item out of the enemies when they would have ideally wanted to go for something else. So that's also a form of pressure too. He is just an insane off-tank. Fernando! Excellent point tank / off tank. He can do all sorts of things. He has a really big shield with Aegis. That's generally the easy way to play him. You know, just shield your allies, shield the point, do a little bit of flame damage, yada yada. But you can also play him as an off tank with Scorch, and you can do insane wall-ups of damage. You can also build your ultimate much faster with Scorch, and his ultimate is easily one of the best S-tier ultimates in the game. Saves him and his entire team around him from everything in the game. Come on, that's crazy. And yeah, overall, just a super solid tank. Khan. Do I even need to explain to you why Khan's good? Highest single target damage in the entire tank class with Storm of Bullets. He has a heal that can heal himself and his teammates, and that recently got better with Rejuvenate because he can buy it to increase his own self-healing. He has a pretty solid shield that he can use to reliably cleanse himself from Cauterize and take additional damage from the enemy team. And, of course, he also has that built-in stun, and he has the free kill execute long-ranged ultimate, where you just yoink an enemy, and then you can either have your team shoot them to death, or you can throw them off the map. And, yeah, another S-tier ultimate, so, yeah, obviously he's a fantastic tank. Terminus, the power siphon, blocks all the damage, and you can have a really good uptime on it too. And he's also extremely tanky in his own right with the right build. Undying plus Strength of Stone gives him insane damage reduction, and then the movement speed card gives him insane movement speed, and consistent damage up close, but then also he can make a ton of space with his ultimate. His ultimate allows him to play super aggressively, use all of his tools at his disposal, the Shatterfall, the Power Siphon Drain, all of that, and then when he ults, he gets all of that back, all of his health back, and he can continue to make space or back out because the space has already been made. So he is an incredible space-making tank. Even though he doesn't sometimes get crazy stats on the scoreboard, his value is still, it just cannot be understated. So he's another excellent tank. And then finally, oh my gosh, I keep waffling on about tanks, we have Ruckus and Azan. So both of these got some pretty crazy buffs in the recent updates, and Azan is just broken, and they probably should revert the buff, but he still can absolutely be diffed by any of the tanks previously. He can still get hooked and die by Makoa, he can still get rebound and die by Atlas. Fernando can still just protect his team from him, he can still be ulted by Khan, he can still even be diffed by a Ruckus. So yeah, he's fantastic, but, you know, the other tanks still have stuff to deal with him, which is just crazy. So Azan, yeah, the buff he got was basically 1 second off of every single cooldown that he has, which, yeah, that's strong, but then it actually ends up being even stronger than that when you consider how it affects tempering. So tempering basically gets buffed twofold by this cooldown buff, because first of all, the base cooldowns being lower means that the starting point from which tempering applies its debuff is lower, and so you just generally have lower cooldowns from that. But also, the penalty that tempering provides is less, because it scales the penalty based on the base cooldown. So when you have a lower base cooldown, you have a lower penalty. It basically double dips and means that the cooldown on tempering right now is insane. Also, there's a bug where Reckoning doesn't even get affected by tempering at all right now, so it receives the benefits of tempering, but it doesn't receive the cooldown penalty. And yeah, the dash also. If you run it with the cooldown card, you get Chronos maxed out. You basically have one of the best movement abilities in the game on a reasonably low cooldown. It's utterly ridiculous. So pair that with his already strong base kit. You have the walls, which can trap enemies, block damage, yada yada. You have the stun from his dash, plus the mobility of his dash. You have the ultimate, which allows him to play hyper aggressive and then either continue to play more aggressive or get out. And then you also have the Reckoning, which interrupts movement abilities, and then consistent powerful burst damage on top of all that. He's absurd right now, so he goes to the top of A tier, and Ruckus also got a really nice buff. The funny thing is, Aerial Assault is exactly the same strength this patch as it was before this patch, because all they've done is they've put the verticality from Aerial Assault into base kit. What has changed, however, is Flux Generator, which on paper just got nerfed this patch, right? Because it lost 500 shield health. However, what it gains in the form of the base kit vertical dash more than makes up for that and makes Flux Generator a seriously powerful talent right now. You have incredible mobility, it makes Flux Generator viable on vertical maps like Serpent Beach, and you also have a more powerful shield which allows him to push aggressively into enemies and just sustain a bunch of damage better, and that crowd control immunity which allows you to reactively pop emitter in the face of so many crowd control abilities. Damba Fear, Nyx Stun, shoot, you can even preemptively predict a hook with it or anything like that. That is super powerful, and Ruckus still maintains some of the highest damage in the tank class, really good primary fire, missiles on top of that, and of course, one of the most powerful DPS ultimates in the game. So there's a lot to love about Ruckus right now, and that concludes my very massive summary of why you should play tanks. This is tank propaganda. You need to play tanks this patch. Tanks are really good. You should play tanks. if there's one message you take away from this video, it's that. Oh my gosh. They're so freaking good right now. Alright, now finally let's talk about the S tier, and this is looking kind of thin as well. We lost a lot of the people in S tier, just like we lost a lot of the people in D tier. So let's break down what's going on here. Maldamba, still in S tier. They literally they slapped him on the wrist this update. They made it so that the penalty for missing Mending Spirits is just a little longer now. Whoop-de-doo. He still has really freaking good heals, really freaking good survivability, really freaking good crowd control, and if you put it all together and you hit your shots well, really freaking good damage. He's an all-arounder, and they've buffed him to a state where, yeah, he's just the cream of the crop right now. And yeah, if you're not playing Damba, then, well, you're just playing an inferior support right now. And then, Bomb King is in S tier. He did get nerfed this update. It's actually a nerf that I asked for, and I'm very glad they implemented it. They made it so that Poppy Bomb is finally affected by cripples. And I have to say, I have yet to actually notice the nerf, because there's actually a lot of matchups where it literally doesn't matter. If the enemy team doesn't have cripples, then the nerf is non-existent, and he's still just as strong as he was last patch. But even when you are up against cripples, he's still insane. He's still got arguably the best mobility in the damage class. He also has really good burst damage, really good consistent damage, good pressure versus pretty much any character. If you're skilled at him, he can even do some good stuff at long range. Good zoning with the Grumpy Bomb, and yeah, his ultimate can be very good when used well for locking down some kills and making space. So yeah, I mean, you should have expected this, and yeah, there's nothing really more to say. He's still just a fantastic character when you play him right. But now we get to the interesting section of the S tier. So, Koga and Vatu are still here, even though they got some changes. And then... Am I seeing this right? Is that Vora? Huh? Okay, what have they done? Well, let's talk about Koga and Vatu real quick before we talk about Vora. Koga got a sort of soft rework this update. They put Adrenaline Chunky into base kit, but at a much lower level, so you don't get as much energy from shooting enemies, and they also nerfed the rate at which he builds energy passively. However, this still ends up being really freaking strong, because now you can either get Adrenaline Junkie at a slightly lower value, and his new talent at the same time, or Adrenaline Junkie and Blood Reaper at the same time. Or, I guess it technically helps Dragon Fangs too, I guess, although really it mostly affects these other two talents. And that does end up being very valuable for Koga. They also did nerf his Claw Stance a little bit. They changed that in some ways. They basically made it so that the more targets you pierce, the less damage it does, which is eminently reasonable, but it is a nerf to his damage. And also they took away the movement speed bonus on the Claw Stance, but they made it so that you can switch into the Claw Stance faster at base kit now, meaning you don't actually have to invest into Swift Hands anymore if you want to play around the claws, which gives him more build diversity, which ends up being a positive. So that's pretty good too. And of course, the new talent gives him a damage bonus when firing his submachine guns. He basically shoots faster and moves faster after using a Shadow Step, and well, do I need to tell you why that's a good thing, especially when you're playing on controller and you have aim assist when Koga is a fantastic character to use with aim assist? I don't think I need to tell you why that's good, so I'm not going to. You're just going to have to infer that for yourself. But now let's talk about Vatu. Vatu, he is perfect right now. That's the only way I can describe him. They gave him a reload animation canceled to make him feel smoother to play. They removed the damage reduction on dash, but to be honest, as a Vatu player, you don't notice it that much. However, it does make him a tiny bit easier to kill. They've also changed how Enveloping Shadows works. Now the talent changes, now the talent gives you cooldown reduction per kunai you hit. So if you only hit one, you get 3%, but if you hit all three, you get 9%. There's no internal cooldown, so now it's consistent, it's intuitive, it's fair. And yeah, put all that together, and Vatu is just, he's feeling great. And they did nerf his damage. The damage was previously overpowered, and it made him arguably like SS tier. Now it's back to the previous level of damage, so he's still bursting very quickly, still has some of the best mobility in the game, still has some really good DR in the form of his cards, still has the stun on his ultimate. He's feeling really good. He feels really good to play. He's not as brutally unfair to play against as he was last patch, but if you're great at the champion, if you put a lot of time in to master him, he is still undeniably, easily one of the strongest, if not the strongest flank in the game. So that's why he remains in S tier, because yeah, he technically got nerfed, but really, he's basically at the same power level as he was pre-buff, minus the DR on dash, and that's not enough to kick him out of S tier for me. But now, here's the very hot take, although potentially not hot take, depending on how the community views Vora right now. Vora got some massive changes in this update. 2 talent reworks, and 1 very special talent put into the base kit. Double Tendril is in base kit now, so she passively just has 2 charges of the Tendril. And when you stack this with either Unyielding Pressure or the new talent, which is called Eclipsed Affection. I almost forgot the name of it. She is a powerhouse. So let me break it down why she's so good. First of all, Double Tendril gives her very good mobility. It's a massive spike in how far she can move across the map and how well she can dodge attacks, get in, and then get out. So yeah, that puts her more on par with a character like, I don't know, Eevee or Vatu or Seven or Maeve, and less so on par with, like, I don't know, a Caspian without Everywhere at Once, or maybe a Xin or someone like that. So yeah, that is a very, very major power spike. Her damage is also excellent. With Unyielding Pressure, that hasn't been nerfed or changed at all. It still gives her really good percent-based damage, huge damage on the Dark Siphon, and that will just combo together with a flurry of hits to burst someone down really quickly. And Eclipsed Affection also gives her a little bit more damage on the Obliterate, but more importantly, it gives her more uptime on the Obliterate, and that translates into a heck of a lot more immunity frames, and a heck of a lot more use cases of Obliterate, which means more damage. So both of these give her more damage than actually a surprising amount of peers in the flank class. For example, she does way more damage than Eevee, while having now roughly similar like traversal as Eevee, still not quite the same level of dodging in some cases, but very good mobility, right? Certainly up there. She still has damage immunity, just like Eevee, in the form of Obliterate, but now, yeah, she does more damage, and she still has that cripple on Dark Siphon, which is not an ultimate ability, whereas Eevee's is an ultimate ability. So if Eevee is an A tier, then Vora clearly is an S tier now with this change, not to mention she still has the ultimate, which we completely have not talked about, which is an execute. Or, if you don't end up executing, you can still use it actually to open a fight against a squishy character and basically get them to half health, stun them, and then you can finish them off with an Obliterate or something like that. So there are a lot of tools at Vora's disposal right now. She is very strong in the damage department, very good range, very good consistency, very good mobility. She has very good crowd control in her base kit as a base ability, not even needing to ult for it. She does a lot right now, and yeah, she is arguably an S tier champion, which is why, well, I have put her into S tier. Let me know if you agree with that in the comments section down below. Again, might be a hot take. I originally was going to put her in A tier, but then I really thought about it and was like, yeah, no, she's kind of disgusting. So yeah, up into S tier she goes. But to be honest, sort of a post-tier list evaluation here, she is very strong, but I don't feel that she is the level of oppression that we've seen from more, I guess, outlier characters in times past. For example, when Androxus was overpowered with Cursed Revolver, when Seven was overpowered. I feel like those champions had way larger power spikes above the rest of the pack than what we've seen in the current patch. Going back to what I said at the start of the video in the D tier, I feel like Evil Mojo is doing a pretty good job of bringing the roster closer together in terms of their power. Now, more than a lot of times in Paladins history, you can play just about any character and do really well with them, which I think is a very good thing. Of course, you might disagree with that, and that's fine, and I'd love to hear your opinion, but that is indeed my analysis of the current meta right now. The S tier and the D tier are both a lot smaller than last patch, and yeah, I've really enjoyed the balance that they've done in this patch. So yeah, they're still not perfect. There are still a lot of mistakes being made. We don't talk about Crystalline Battery for Kinessa, but yeah, they are slowly but surely making this game a heck of a lot better, and so I really do appreciate that. But yeah, that's going to do it for this tier list video, so let me know what you think of the tier list in the comment section down below. Make sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss more from me, and also if you want to support the channel directly, then please check out the Nexus down below. Nexus.gg/AndrewChicken is where you can go to buy crystals, the season pass, and more, and support the channel directly in the process, and it's officially affiliated with Evil Mojo, so I'd really appreciate it if you would check it out. But with all that being said, thank you guys for watching. I will see you all next time. Peace out.